Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Clinton Wingrove and welcome to this next webinar in the series Performance Management, Inspiring or Infuriating. This one covers the topic of enabling and enhancing performance, which one could argue is the sole purpose of performance management, that is to improve things. What we know is that typical performance management processes, which comprise annual goal setting, episodic reviews, and annual appraisals, are extremely important, but they primarily address the minimum standards for corporate governance. What they rarely do is actually lead to performance improvement, and in fact, there is some research indicating that they may actually limit performance. An interesting discussion there around goal setting, etc. What we shared with you on our first webinar was a model which describes the 7 components that every performance management process or system actually comprises, whether or not you design it. The first one was setting direction, people getting an understanding of what the organization is about, what it's trying to achieve, and what its values are. Secondly, clarifying roles, or not, as the case may be. The level at which clarity is achieved in terms of what we expect of people. Planning and aligning performance. How well is that done and what does it cover? Monitoring and measuring. How do we know what performance is actually happening, not only as managers, but also how do we know ourselves how well we're performing? The topic for today, enabling, enhancing, which one could argue is the most important of all the components. And then assessing and evaluating. What's the difference between those? An interesting topic we'll be covering in our next webinar. And then rewarding and recognizing. And many organizations fall back on the fact that it's reward and money that motivates people. And yet, with some very important exceptions, that's rarely the case. So what we described is that performance management is a set of processes that aims to improve what people produce, how they produce it, and the extent and speed with which they develop, A, to meet the existing demands, and B, to meet future demands. And any performance management process or set of systems is ultimately going to address what we all want, and that is clarity. We need to know precisely what performance is expected of us, but we also need to know how that's currently perceived. We need assurance. We can't guarantee people's jobs, but as managers, we can assure them that we've got their backs and will do the best to ensure that they have a role. We need recognition. We now know that recognition is a primary motivator of improved performance. And if any of you have come across the book Super Teams by myself and Dr. Paul Marciano, you'll understand the critical role that plays. And then lastly, empathy. If nothing else, COVID taught us that we need to understand how people feel, particularly if they're feeling disconnected, they're working remotely, not getting adequate feedback, etc. Employees now expect us to demonstrate empathy. You'll be getting this slide deck, and in it we've included this slide, which gives you a link to a variety of handouts which relate to topics around the conversation that we're having today. Excuse me. So what are we covering today? Enabling and enhancing. So I want to share with you some of our thoughts about how to enable and enhance performance. And as we've said just now, performance has got 3 components. How do we enable people to enhance what they produce, the outputs they produce? How do we enable them to improve how they go about it, to achieve a greater level of efficiency, perhaps even reduce anxiety by equipping them to achieve more with less? And how do we enable and enhance their attention to growth and development? The speed with which the business world is changing is such that if we don't develop rapidly, we're going to fall out of the workforce. And in the earlier session on planning, we talked about the importance of measures. You can't manage something if you can't measure it. So we should be thinking about, how do we measure the quantitative aspects of performance? Everybody produces something if we're employing them. How do we measure the qualitative aspects? And we talked about the difference, for example, between a salesperson where we can measure the sales that they make, and a receptionist where it's more about the quality of how they handle distinguished guests, employees, etc., coming into our business. And then it's really important that we think about use of resources and time. What we now know is if you give me as much time as I want, I'll offer to achieve anything you like. Equally, if you don't limit the resources I've got available to me, I'm more likely to commit to higher output. The trick about planning performance is ensuring that people are quite clear about the volume of what you want them to produce, the quality of it, the resources you expect them to invest in doing so, or at least the maximum, and how quickly you want the actual output to be produced. And of course, as we mentioned in the planning session, these need to be measured in a variety of ways. In some situations, we may have a single standard that we want met.